but it's the skepticism of the business right now. It's okay to be skeptical. I get it. Grew up with a father who was skeptical of a lot of things on the farm because he just had a lot of bad experiences. And I think there are farmers that certainly have had a lot of bad experiences. They've been sold a lot of empty promises. And it's our job to be able to help people understand that if you're going to use it, here's why. What's the problem it solves, right? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Does the product portfolio fit on every of your acres? Maybe not, right? Maybe you're already doing a really good job. Maybe you have a ceiling that you're trying to bump through. Well, how can we do that, right? Is that the problem? How do we address it?
Welcome back to the Cornelius Seed Podcast. I'm your host, Juan, and today we're tackling a big question in agriculture. With so many biological products and companies out there, how do you know who and what to trust? At Cornelius Seed, we've been asking the same question, and it's why we've partnered with Streamline AG. In this episode, we'll share why we made that decision and how some of their key products can help address several challenges like corn rootworm, soybean cyst nematode, corrosive starter fertilizers, managing crop residue, and getting that perfect seed bed, and so much more. So joining me today, we have James Cornelius, one of the owners, alongside Jason Ladman from Streamline AG. Jason will break down what makes their approach different and how their products can fit into your operation, and the practical ways that they're helping other growers like you get the most from every acre. There's a lot of noise in the biological space, but this conversation is about cutting through that and focusing on what really works. So Jason, welcome to the show, and let's dive in.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So Jason, if we can kind of get into it, and who are you and who is Streamline AG?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm almost nearing 30 years veteran in the ag industry. I've served in a lot of different capacities. I spent a lot of time in the seed industry early in my career, then moved over into doing some consulting work for some fairly significant sized farm operations in the United States. And then I got swooned back into the seed organization and ended up here with Streamline AG. So I grew up in central Nebraska on a irrigated corn and soybean farm. We also had a little bit of cattle. And I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what goes on in the farm today from a lot of different aspects, not only from production, but also to profitability and what goes into that. And so, as I've been here at Streamline AG, it's been an interesting ride because, as you mentioned, Juan, we're dealing in a time period where the industry is looking towards new, innovative things in the biological world. And for me, being at Streamline AG has been a privilege because it's opened my eyes to a little bit more of what's going on in the industry beyond the seed. But we know that for companies like Cornelius Seed, that's the bread and butter, right? So where Streamline fits in and where Streamline comes along is how do we, and you'll notice in our tagline, we're seed-driven crop inputs. And our goal is to make sure that we can support the seed industry by enhancing the seed and getting the most, maximizing the most genetic potential, if you will.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for putting it that way. And James, JC, as we call him here in house. How did this come to be? I mean, I know that we've had lots of folks, knocking on the door, and we'll always have people calling and sending us delicious treats to say, check out this biological. And I know you guys have, and you're extremely analytical and you vet things through. How did we land, and why did we land on Streamline?
Where we started with looking at Streamline AG is we had partnered with another business to provide some soybean inoculant, and we really be another option out there that aligned better with the American farmer and what they really needed. So as we started focusing in on different portfolios and options out there, it really came down to the simplicity of the pail that we'll talk about here in a little bit, and really the ability for Streamline to be able to sift through all the new technologies and then help provide what is best, what we can bring to the farmer and what's going to be the ROI. There's very few entities out there who actually have the ability to see through all the different new innovations that are coming through it. We believe our partnership with Streamline AG is going to better help us do that and bring things that'll have ROI.
JC, thanks for, going into that. And I mean, whenever you were going through and you're said, I just remember, a revolving door coming in and you guys going into the conference room. What were those check marks? What were those vetting points for you where you were saying, like, all right, we can keep this conversation going. This is why we need to sign up with these folks, partner with them?
Yeah, so I think some things, when we're looking at people who we're going to do business with, I mean, we want them to be similar minded as us and bring profitable solutions to the farmer. We want to supply products that's going to actually make a difference in their operation. And sometimes it won't fit everyone's operation, but really that's what we're looking at. Some things that we saw in Streamline, and there was a few others that got down to, I think basically we're down to about 2 companies. And really, when we look at it, it was we know some of the managers or owners of Streamline Ag. We know the people who work for them, and really have just got to know them, know their personality types from past experiences in the seed industry. Reality is the seed industry is a pretty small knit group, so you can really get good references and know people throughout the years. So really, when it came down to it, and we could check that box of all the being seed focused, focusing on what's good for the farmer and providing products that can solve solutions. And then when you check the box on great people on top of that, it was pretty easy to make.
So let's jump into the products. You know, TuneUp Plus is one of the lines that we really wanted to come out and promote right away with our customers and our grower base, whether it's TuneUp Plus corn or TuneUp Plus soybeans, and we'll kind of dig into that. But you know, when we think about TuneUp Plus internally, you know, we're thinking about, all right, we know it's going to help our growers whenever we're running into those variable fields with, at least our footprint has a lot of variable soils. And sometimes it feels like there's a ceiling there. And I know the team thought that this is going to get you past that ceiling. This is how we're going to either protect profits or maximize them. If you can, Jason, give us a little kind of umbrella recap on that. So like what TuneUp Plus is.
Yeah. So a couple things I think are important to make sure that the listeners understand is from a perspective of Streamline Ag, we really want to make products simple. And so they have to have a purpose and they have to solve a problem. And so one of the things that we're dealing with right now is, as any listener knows, you can go pretty much anywhere in any magazine or any website and look up, if you're doing any research on biologicals, there's so much to know, right? And it's almost impossible to really get your arms wrapped around. One of the things that I really try to educate people on is to understand that if you're going to be using biologicals, you want to make sure that they're delivered alive, right? And so that's a big component. And we strive, and we have a lot of pride in saying that we can deliver these products alive because of the TuneUp Plus pail that we're going to talk a little bit about. Because the farmer's money is hard earned, no different than it is in a seed company. And so if you're going to ask somebody to spend some dollars with you, you really want to make sure that the products you're giving to them have the efficacy that you're telling them they have the capacity to deliver on. So the pail and this technology, and I believe the pail itself is going to morph over time in terms of what types of uses the pail is going to bring. But let's just focus in on TuneUp Plus One, as you mentioned. When we came to the market with this pail, it was really to provide a dry planter box treatment that was able to deliver some micronutrients, as well as a talc graphite load, which most growers today are using talc graphite in their planters for fluency, and then also to pair that with a biological compounds that we felt, and the people that we supply from felt, were important for emergence, early season vigor, root mass growth, and so forth. And so out of that, here comes the TuneUp Plus pail. And basically, the pail as it's designed is a square bucket, and in the bottom of it is the talc graphite fluency agent, 80/20 talc graphite. It also includes some iron and manganese. One of the big components that we are proud of is the zinc that's in that part of the pail. That zinc in an equivalency, farmers ask all the time, well, what's that worth? We tell people that it has the equivalency of roughly 1 quart of a chelated zinc in furrow, which is highly valuable, just the zinc itself. And then the top of the pail, you have capsules, biological capsules that contain the different types of elements and compounds that Streamline Ag has deemed should be in this pail. And when a farmer gets ready to go to the field, he has the opportunity to basically unlock the pail, if you will, and press down on the capsules, and it releases the biologicals into the fluency agent. And with just some simple shaking, you mix it up, and now it's ready to be put on the seed as you're going to the planter. And if I can just jump back, we know from experience, JC and I know this from experience, is that if you ask the farmer to do something that's very different from what he's currently doing, it's a little bit harder for them to adopt. And so this pail is designed for ease of use. It's designed to make sure that the products get where they need to be. And we feel like if you're really trying to boost yield through root mass and emergence, the best place you can get product is on the seed. And we really believe that. And that's one of the things that we tout. And so by bringing all this in that fashion, in that pail, is where we find the value and where we believe that the pail has value, even in this environment.
Absolutely. And in the seed industry, boy, I don't want to age myself for over a decade. Not as long as James growing up, and his name's on the bag, so he's probably been on it longer than most of us. But in all seriousness, I think of when I've helped manage inventory here at an old company, it's like, how old is, especially if it came to inoculants, right? Those had that shelf life. It all depended on whether the package was penetrated or something like that. And just looking at that pail, and I know it's right there behind JC, and we'll try to put together a cool little video showing how it works, but it seems to be like the delivery system is really what's setting this apart, keeping things alive, which is pretty good. JC, in the seed world, right? So we've got Jason here talking about the product itself, but our thing is seed. TuneUp Plus with Ether has been talked about, helping with emergence and getting seed out of the ground. What kind of impact or what kind of loss would we have? How does this help? How does this contribute to that environment?
Yeah, Juan, when you're talking about being in the seed industry for a decade, it's starting to get me thinking. I think this summer will probably be that doesn't put me very old when I started. But anyway, to the point here of emergence and stand, I think whether we're talking from a Streamline AG perspective, or really you start talking about lots of other companies out there. I mean, Precision Plant really touts the fact of getting stand establishment faster, having another 1,000 plants per acre out there, and getting anywhere from 3 to 6 bushel per acre. You can. It's not always to have a better stand establishment right out of the gates doesn't 100% always correlate to higher yield, but what it does always correlate to the higher potential to get that yield. I mean, something later in the season can come by, a derecho, because it turns out we like to have those cross corns felt these days. Something like that, a drought, a bad weather event, they can come later, but your best foot forward to start it right out of the gates is where this ether really comes in, and enzymes to help make more nutrients available for the small, tiny root mass right as it's get going and continues on to help. Getting that out, getting that plant out of the ground, helping it get sunlight faster, making a more even stand establishment for later in the crop's life to have a better opportunity is really something that we're seeing is another benefit.
Okay. And I'd hate to, we kind of joke about what did Juan learn, right? I mean, IT is my thing. I'm here because I can help kick this off and get these podcasts going. And I don't remember in my linear regression class in college when I was working on my econ degree, what zinc does for the crop. And Jason, you mentioned about how, we kind of pride yourself, I think you said, in 1 quart in the 4.0 based off what we're doing. Either both of you, why does zinc matter to me or to a grower?
Well, from my perspective, and JC, you can chime in on this agronomically with my experience and what I've seen. And zinc is really critical for early season emergence. It's really critical for that seedling vigor. It's critical for early root growth. Without it, you get a different type of vigor in the plant. Oftentimes, just having that zinc that readily available is just, it makes the world of a difference. I know it seems strange in some regards because it's not a macronutrient, and yet it's one that's highly prized to be able to be put in a way where the plant it's so readily available in this form. I don't know how else to add to that without getting into a lot of depth, but it's really for root mass and it's really for early season vigor. JC, anything you'd add to that?
Well, zinc is something that we've actually tried different trials, and some of our seed reps out there actually had some zinc trials in there where we were trying to add zinc to a seed treatment. Really, if you think about zinc in itself, I believe it's a positive 4 charge. So it makes it a really active element. What winds up happening a lot of times in many of these things is it does get to the point where it's already tied itself up or not all of it's available. So I'm really excited about how this comes in this product, and it is a higher percent available product right out of the gates. I think the other thing is when you look at the added iron and manganese that comes in this ale as well, just more things. If you think back to Agronomy 101, where they talk about whatever your lowest state in the barrel is, that's where you're going to leak out the yield. And this is just a great option to be able to make sure that those are limiting.
Yeah, and they're easy elements to put into the pail. Just kind of a sidebar, a couple of things that when you talk about formulations, and maybe this isn't the place to talk about it, but when we think about the pail as an example, if you have customers that are considering using the pail versus somebody else, and you start to look at labels and what have you, not everything is created equal. So you think about zinc as an example, basically being a metal, if you will. It has a higher density, has a higher weight. And so one of the things that was discovered when people that were designing the pail in terms of what was in it, we know that talc and graphite typically are pretty lightweight. So when you go in and throw zinc in it, if you were just to throw in a zinc product, typically it wants to fall out and settle out. And even when you put it on with the seed, even if it adheres to the seed, some of it falls off and some of it falls to the bottom of the planter, which really becomes, I wouldn't say not useful, but maybe not as useful as it could be. So let's talk about formulation a little bit. People often ask, well, that's, you have a premium product. And yeah, we do have a premium product, but the reality is we're trying to formulate it in a way that we get as much efficacy out of it. So if I talk about the zinc's been reformulated in a way that actually makes it a little bit lighter in weight. And so that way it has a better ability to adhere to the seed, and because it's less dense, and the way that it was formulated, it mimics more of the talc and graphite weight load. So that way, if you will, we don't have rocks in the bottom of a feather barrel, if you will. I don't know whatever way to say it, but hopefully the listeners get that. The reality is to make them closer to density, so that way they have the ability to adhere to the seed better, and you don't have fallout. And so I think it's important for customers to understand that there is differences, even though you could look at a label and say, oh, it has zinc and it's got this and it's got that. I think understanding formulation to the product also is important.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, my brother-in-law farms quite a bit of acres down in Southern Illinois, and obviously naturally given what I do, I'm consistently kind of letting him know that he's leaving profit out in the field by not getting our seed, right? I'm biased naturally, but when I was telling about Streamline, and he goes, folks are quick to dismiss, and I know it's just right now because once you get started, you never go back, and folks are like always start on a little bit of their acres, and then usually the following year they go 100%, and we saw this with Pivot Bio on seed for us. But at any rate, my brother-in-law was just like, he's hesitant on adding anything into the box because it's gonna gunk it up, it's gonna gum it up. And whenever you talk about so many offerings in the pail, you're like, what peace of mind can we give folks to let them know that that's not happening? This has been vetted, and what can you share about that?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. I've had that people ask, why doesn't it gunk up, right? How many products becomes too many products? And am I really getting the seed coat covering that you tell me that you're getting? What I can tell you is, I don't know where the limit is on the number of products that you can put inside of a pail. Certainly there will be a limit at some point, and it will either be because it'll be too expensive and it won't fit the marketplace, or just simply it won't mix well. But I can tell you the people that are putting these products together, they do a lot of testing to make sure that, number one, it doesn't mess with a planter. Now, does that mean we haven't found some planter issues from time to time? Yes, I mean, we do from time to time, but I would be transparent to tell you not everything in ag is perfect. But you try to work through those things and try to understand that before you go to the marketplace. One of the unique studies that was done was to address the coverage issue is, how much do I have to mix the product, right? I get that all the time from a coverage standpoint. And really, you don't have to mix the product a lot at all. We give people really simple instructions on how to use it. But what we had a lab do was we gave the simple instructions on how to put the seed in your planter with the TuneUp Plus pails. And then we asked the grower to lift his planter up and basically spin a little bit of seed out. And we captured that seed. And then we asked them to plant 20 feet. And we lifted the planter up and captured that seed. And then we asked them to plant 20 acres and then 80 acres. And then basically at the very end of their planter, we took that dose of seed as well. What they do with those seeds is they keep them all separate, whatever, handful of seeds they gather, and they take them back to the lab and they basically wash the product off the seed. And then they basically figure out what's the culture it, if you will, to figure out what is actually present. And from a percentage standpoint, from the very beginning to the very end, there was virtually no difference in seed coat coverage. And I think that's important for people to understand, because people do ask those questions, Juan. And it's like, do I have to go through a lot of work to make this to make this product stick to the seed? What do I have to do specifically to make sure that it works? And then it's the only confidence I can give people is that 60% of our entire business at Streamline Ag is run through these pails, and we sell a significant amount of these pails. And I will tell you that it is rare that we ever end up with somebody having a problem with fluency. So obviously, if you can trust somebody that you're hearing for the first time, but I would tell you that we typically don't have any problems.
No, and that makes sense, right? So many variables involved in what is already on it, has it been uptreated, et cetera. So, but thank you for going into that, because I'm definitely going to clip this and send it to my brother.
On something to that point, there are products out there that have some significant benefits. I know there was a microvac product that we got offered to use a few years back. And, nearing the end of the year, we kind of decided, well, I'm going to kind of get this used up. So I started applying more to it, and definitely had some issues where it built up. I was putting soybeans in ground, and actually got to the point where the corner of the boxes of the planter didn't really want to have weeds roll out. I was going 4 or 5x the rate just to use it up. But the other reality is there's other products that are made from natural, made from soybeans, made from whatnot, help for being a fluency agent. They have some great benefits to themselves, having some of that amino acid. But the reality is there's also been experiences where you can overdo that.
Okay. No, thank you. So, and almost every single thing we're going to talk about, we can go on and on and on, because there's truly so much, and I want to be respectful of your time, Jason. I kind of want to kick into TuneUp Plus for corn. Whenever I remember sitting back at a conference not that long ago, and folks saying that you will have multiple ways to manage corn rootworm outside of the traits, and obviously outside of rotating acres and, things like that. And so that I remember that really piquing my interest, because sometimes, you don't need to go full bore, especially if you're doing some soil sampling, and you realize that not a whole field needs to be managed. And there's probably more efficient ways to address a problem. And I think, if anything, I learned last week at a recent conference we were at was, the nature of margins, the nature of the industry and what's happening in the world is things are getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And we're not where we were a handful of years ago, where folks were sitting flush with cash. And if they were sitting flush with cash, they were probably buying steel. And then, now you're in situations with, how do we don't want to cut costs rather, but, how do we replace what we're doing? Or maybe you need to cut costs, but nonetheless, where I was going into with this is managing corn rootworm. Sometimes we want to throw the top line technology to it, and it might call for it and it might not. And I'm curious, if either of you, or JC, if you can start off with going into is, how is Streamline Ag, TuneUp Plus for corn specifically, going to help our customers with that are having some heavy pressure with corn rootworm? Do they partner that with a Smart Stack or a Smart Stack Pro? And just go into that, if you will.
Yes. Selling in eastern and northeastern Iowa, across Iowa and into Illinois, we are graced with the ability to, we're graced with the opportunity that we sell to a lot of growers due to livestock and other situations. But then in that same space is the place where we have the highest infestation levels. So when you look at it right now, as far as the trait goes, the Smart Stack Pro probably has the best total package to control that. But we've even seen certain instances where the population has just grown enough that could use another bump. So adding an granular insecticide to that's something. When you look at that, you're talking, okay, so now we're starting to get into a skull and crossbones situation. And some people don't have that equipment. It used to be a common thing, but as planters have gotten bigger and heavier, that's some things that people have taken off due to traits. Well, this is the CRW product, which is in the pail right now, TS201, is a product that is giving another ability to repel corn rootworms from the roots. Pretty excited about the capacity of this because not only does it help with keeping rootworms from finding the roots, it eats up the carbon dioxide that the roots expel, and then the larvae can't find the roots as well. I mean, as you always say, a blind squirrel will find an acorn, right? So if you're in a high enough infestation level, it won't do everything because eggs might be laying right where the roots are growing. But the cool thing about this being about biological and growing with the roots, it gives us a little longer window of protection. Another thing that it does is even in the absence of corn rootworm, we're seeing bigger root masses. And anytime you have a bigger root mass, the benefit is better standability through storms and whatnot because you got a bigger anchor in the ground. When you have that bigger anchor in the ground, you're able to draw a lot more nutrients out of the ground, whether that be nitrogen throughout the year, or the other reality is just have access to water, sometimes through micronutrients. Very excited to what that can see. I mean, I see it in the extended diapause area, or even the variant that lays its eggs in the soybeans, and you don't have much of a infestation level. I think this could be something that you use in those super high infestation levels where you might not want to use a soil applied insecticide. Throw this on top of your SmartStack Pro or VT4 Pro and have some great control of it.
So thank you for that.
If you don't mind me, Juan, one
Please.
thing I would add to what JC said, and he's 100% right in everything he just mentioned. What's been interesting is we've dug a lot of root masses in various situations, but under high infestation, JC talked about how we have bigger root masses. One of the things I would add to that is that we're seeing after we dig and wash roots that have been fed on, basically making sure that the trait is the same, but the only variable is the TS201. So that's the CRW compound. We're seeing faster root regeneration. So roots that have been fed on where the TS201 was applied to the seed, for whatever reason, I don't know that we can clearly identify the why behind it yet, but we are seeing a significant amount of better root regeneration. So if in the event or when you do have feeding, the ability for that plant to regenerate as a result of that compound being on the plant and being synergistic with the plant has created some unique aspects of root regeneration. So I think it's important for people to understand that it's not only we're trying to keep the rootworm away, as JC said, and he said it very well how it works, but also the regeneration in the event of when you actually have feeding.
And I appreciate you kind of honing in on that, Jason, because, whenever we introduce SmartStack Pro technology into the industry, I know one of the things, at least, and I've mentioned my brother-in-law, Mark, I'm sorry if you're listening to this, and we're working through, when we heard that, he goes, cool, it's going to knock everything out. We're like, no, this is going to help make sure we're reducing populations in your field, right? I mean, you and your dad and your grandfather have been doing corn on this field for 40 plus years. And so, in situations where there's going to be feeding no matter what, because we know it, like you mentioned, that's super good to know that you guys are seeing, and we're seeing, better regeneration in the roots. And I think that's really good to highlight is, both of you talked about not only, especially if you're working and making sure there's ether in the pail, but not only is it going to get out of the ground faster, our roots going to be established better. We're not worried about gunking up. They're going to regenerate quicker. But what I'm also hearing is, there are situations where folks took weight off the tractor, right? We may not have the same equipment to get insecticides on. And this is, in a way, is allowing us to bring that TS201 to help manage any of those corn rootworm problems. So, I can't stress that enough, folks. If you're running into situations where you feel like you're throwing everything at it and the field just feels like it's got a ceiling, there's more options out there, right? And so, anything that we're missing that we need to make sure that we need to capture as it relates to TuneUp Plus for corn before we move on to beans?
One thing that actually is another reason we specifically went with Streamline Ag and Streamline Ag's recognition. There's a few of the pails with Ether and with CRW or both that you can actually get as, so standard, the pail has a 50 unit pail. So you apply the product that's in the pail to 50 units or 80K units. But Streamline can provide the growers who want to either try it out, or I don't care what size farmer you are, there's always that last field where 50 is not necessarily going to nail it right on the exact thing. And I think this is the reality why we have customized boxes. But there are smaller pails that just have 24 units worth of product in them. And that way you can either try it out specifically, or you said, finishing that last field, you don't have to crack a 50 unit pail in order to finish that field and get that good product.
So thank you. That's good to know. And then, so let's say a grower does get a pail. I mean, just out of curiosity, because like I mentioned with inoculants, we've got shelf life of 6 months or less, if I recall correctly. It's not cracked open. It's sitting in a good environment. What's shelf life on something like that?
So the TuneUp Plus products, all of them have a shelf life of what we would classify as 2 cropping cycles, but 2 cropping cycles don't really cover a full 24 months. I call it 2 cropping cycles because you can get 2 cropping cycles out of it, but the reality is it's about 18 months when it's untampered. For growers asking themselves, well, how long do I have to get it in the ground? Basically, once you break open the capsules or deploy the capsules into the bottom of the pail, you really have, I tell guys, you got about a day to get it onto the seed, a day or 2 at max to get it onto the seed. Once it's on the seed, you're going to really have about 3 or 4 days that you get it in the ground. Obviously, any biologicals you're dealing with are live. And if you can get them, the faster you can get them into the ground, the absolute best. I tell people, if you're getting ready to puncture or deploy the capsules into a pail and it's a 50 unit pail, as JC mentioned, and it looks like there's a big rain event on the horizon, I would tell you just hold off on it, because I would rather you not waste the efficacy of the pail if in the event of, I'd rather you plant 20 acres potentially without the pail, because if you're sitting for 2 weeks because of additional rain or what have you, the efficacy eventually will go down. Now, I don't know what to the degree that is, but I feel like in full transparency, it's the way I talk to my growers, and I know it's the way James would talk to his growers, but we just want to make sure that you have a good experience with the product. So there's some do's and don'ts, if you will, but that's the longevity. Shelf life's about 18 months.
All right. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate that. So, moving on over to soybeans in the soybean world, we were excited to bring TuneUp Plus soybeans to our growers. And one of the things that folks that have just been pushing limits on yields and whenever you're digging roots up for whatever reason, nodulation, right? Nodulation has been the name of the game. How do we get more nodes on those roots? How is TuneUp Plus soybeans helping us for that?
Yeah, I'll start and I'll let JC put his agronomic expertise on this. There's been a lot of studies on nodulation, right? So any of the guys that are doing high yield and that are raising 100 bushel beans, 200 bushel beans, when you get in those environments, one of the big factors really is, how do you get your soybeans to nodulate? And it's not just the number, although the number is highly critical, but it's also size. Because if you've ever cut open a nodule, the pink side, when it's pink, that's when it's doing its work. It's fixating, it's fixing nitrogen, right? So the more you can do, the more you can get, and the bigger you can get, the more nitrogen you can fix. And JC knows this just like I do, that soybeans are nitrogen hogs. It takes a lot of nitrogen to raise beans. And so, oftentimes beans get to that point later in the year where we talk about that top pod cluster, and sometimes beans start to abort. There's a lot of factors for that. Part of it is nitrogen, part of it's other things as well. But when I look at the pail, I would point to the pail and say, there's 2 capsules in there that are completely bradyrhizobia, and that's the inoculant. And I would tell you, from my personal experience with the pail and growers that I've worked with, that is absolutely the workhorse of this pail. For fear of maybe putting off some people that listen to this podcast and have maybe some biases towards certain inoculants, I think personally that a lot of inoculants that are applied on the seed oftentimes don't have a lot of efficacy or a lot of viability by the time the seed hits the ground, meaning by the time it gets planted. And so we're really excited that we have the ability to put a very high concentration of bradyrhizobia on the seed at the time of planting for the specific purpose of nodulation.
I don't know if JC can get in deeper on that. It's pretty good.
Well, no, I completely agree with Jason that most people always think about the fact that, well, soybeans don't need nitrogen because we don't apply nitrogen. We just put nitrogen down for corn. And I think when you really sit back and think about it and realize that that's the complete difference between the time we start learning into these azotobacters and things like Bio, which is a ramped up version of those. And then all of a sudden we start realizing that there's a way to get that done. To the point, yeah. So I would agree. Soybeans definitely need lots and lots of nitrogen. I mean, it's probably actually even more than it needs to be sucking up out of the ground. I think, anytime that you're planting a soybean in a field that's 2-3 years removed from soybeans, it's always been shown to show a positive response to put an inoculant down on that soybean. And I think really now that we're starting to get into these higher effective products like what the TuneUp pails for soybeans have in them, and you can start seeing an ROI probably even every year if you're on every other year rotation. Maybe not as much, but I think there's some benefits to doing things. There's other things in the pail. I think earlier Jason kind of hit it towards the fact that the pails really has a lot of options in it. And I've always kind of gone as a shotgun approach. Another reason to go with Streamline is we like to put lots of things in there. And inevitably, there is really something in the pail that year in, year out, one of them or two of them might not do much. But the next year, that might be what you really needed. So as you look at some of these other products out there that only have 1-2 things, you got to decide do this or that or the other thing. I think really the concern is, do you want to go out there with a sniper rifle or do you want to go out there with a shotgun? Take the approach that, some of your BBs are going to miss, but something's going to hit and hit well, as well as shooting as well in comparison to the sniper rifle where you might be shooting at the wrong target. Your soil you're putting this on might already be fully loaded with bacillus, but then all of a sudden the trichodermas.
I like that.
And and JC, I think your analogy is spot on. And I think the other thing that the growers demand is consistency, right? And I think when you're dealing with, this would be a personal bias of mine, if you're dealing with a product that really only has 1 or 2, if I can use the word modes of action, or maybe 1 or 2 pieces that are supposed to affect the plant, JC, I think you said it really well, is there might be years that those don't hit, right? And so in today's day and age, growers want consistency. They don't want it just to work one time. It's just like, it's no different than your hybrids, right? We know that not every year a hybrid is going to be number 1. It's impossible. Farmers look for consistency, and our approach with the pail is to put in a collaboration of multiple products that we believe all have value, but so that way they can create and generate more consistency through a multiple set of years. So hopefully 3 out of 4 years a farmer sees a return. We always hope, and we joke though, that we hope it's not the first year that they try it that they don't see a return, but sometimes that does happen, right? And that's just the nature of the business. And so I encourage people that if you're going to try these types of products, whether it's Streamline AG through Cornelius or if it's somebody else's product, that you really need to be proactive and you need to give the product the opportunity to go more than just 1 year. And that might sound salesman-y. It's not meant to be. It's just meant to say that I would coach you the same way if you were buying Cornelius Seed. If this hybrid is really good, we know it's good. If it doesn't perform the way you expected on year 1, I would still ask you to try it on year 2 because there's a strong likelihood that it's going to perform. So
absolutely, Jason, and thank you for that, because that is definitely true. I know that's something that Craig Olivan, our lead agronomist, is consistently out there promoting, right? Just making sure that you have your top performer, your plot winner, right? 1 out of 5 years, it's not going to be its year for a multitude of reasons, whatever that might be. And one of the things that I actually got a message from Will Cornelius, our soybean lead. James is involved in both, but heavily in the corn world, and he goes, he wants to make sure we're not that we highlight how TuneUp Plus is helping with SCN, or the soybean cyst nematode. And it was really interesting. We were at a seed conference last week, and so that's where we get to talk to some of our friends and competitors at times. And it's definitely got the feeling that soybeans, for a variety of reasons, took pretty good dings across the board at different places, right? Whether it might be white mold or SCN, etc. How is TuneUp Plus helping us manage that problem in the soybean?
Here's the best way here's probably the best way I would go about it. So SCN is a little bit different type of beast than you're dealing with corn rootworm. I would tell you that my experience with the SCN product specifically is that if you have a known field where you know that SCN is a problem, I would tell you that the SCN compound inside of the pail definitely will give you return. If you're just putting it out because you think you might have SCN and you haven't tried to do anything deliberate with changing up your soybean varieties or listening to JC about how to manage this differently, then I would say the results could be varying. The compound itself, in terms it's been tested just as a compound, the SCN compound and nothing else in the pail, in areas where we have a significant SCN problem, and we've seen upwards of 10 to 15 bushels on beans. I mean, that would be gigantic for corn, but this is more than healthy for soybeans. And so, JC, I don't know what you'd want to add to that, but the SCN pail itself has a very specific place. And I would tell you that there are companies out here that can help you determine whether you have SCN. If you believe you do, but you don't know, I would encourage you to go and find those companies to help you determine that, because I don't know that we can do it all just with genetics. I don't know. JC, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think when you think about SCN, the important thing is to always start with a base of a variety that's sulfur-resistant. 88 gene or the Peking gene, you got to start there. And we have some varieties that Will's describing them for the product rollout and whatnot. So they might have a lower SCN rating. So I write those beans down as a PG plus bean. A ProGuard Plus treatment, which has currently has Sultro in it. And that's right now the best in the industry for a seed treatment to control SCN. Honestly, if you have even higher infestations, we look at considering stacking these things. If you are on your last field and you want to be treating or have untreated soybean, just so you don't have any return issues there, this could be an option to put that in, on top of it. I think always these products, when you add them to the soybean varieties, as Will will say, they take the rating for SCN and basically bump it one notch. They don't make it invincible by any means. So really looking at multiple controls there. And yeah, there are multiple companies out there that there's ways that you can test your soil and see what you got in them. That's becoming way less expensive than it used to be, and really some good information.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for covering that. As I go through these notes and I'm looking at it, as it definitely felt like, folks have been calling SCN, like the silent yield robber per se. A lot of the times, those symptoms are hard to notice. And, at the end of the day, whether, like you said, you're looking for a resistant variety, crop rotation, or we're testing soils or using cover crops, now we're introducing the option to use Streamline AG and TuneUp Plus for soybeans and work with it, have it be the other tool in the toolbox. Because, at the end of the day, right, it's all about feeding the plant and making the plant healthier and ready to handle those things. And that's something that I work on reframing a lot is the plant and these microbes are all living things, right? And how can we work with that synergy? Whether is it supporting nutrient uptake, promoting other microbial activity, you name it. And so that's kind of exciting to hear that Streamline in combination with the top selected genetic can really be a good combo to help you get over those humps where you might be feeling like you've got a ceiling. Anything else on TuneUp Plus for soybeans that you folks feel like we need to make sure we hit before we move on to our next one?
I guess the only thing I would add real quick, because I want to be cognizant of time, but I know from a seed perspective, and this is what I appreciate why JC and his group wanted to work with Streamline AG. I think it's important for us as an organization at Streamline AG to be able to educate whether it's the sellers or the users, the end users, of why you would use those products, what products do they solve. But as we get deeper into understanding how these things work, I think it pairs really nicely with a company like Cornelius Seed, because I know James has probably got some seeds, some hybrids that really their best yield comes if you plant them early and you give them a long flower, or it flowers, and then you give a long fill period as an example. And if you really want those hybrids to really thrive, we got to get them in the ground soon, right? So, but if we know if that hybrid in particular might have a slower out of the ground pace, but I really know that this hybrid can really pump out the yield, what can I do to get the products out of the ground faster, right? I think that's where the seed companies and where Cornelius especially can really become a partner with people to say, hey, listen, I know you want to use this product, right? I believe in this product, this hybrid, excuse me. And as a result, if you're going to use this hybrid, I really encourage you to use this product from Streamline AG, whatever it is, but it fills this gap, right? It allows you to plant early in cold, wet soils. It allows you to have better emergence. And it just pairs nicely with the conversation. So I just wanted to make sure that people are aware. I think that's really where this industry is going for those that really are trying to work with the seed company.
I appreciate that, Jason. Thank you. And as you mentioned that, I have the, working in the office and in my role, I have the blessing to get out and, when it's nice outside, fly the drone or go check out customers' fields and just get really just pretty pictures, take a look at stuff. I think in a multitude of years that I've been here, I've never had to fly it to address an issue, at least for us, other than trying to find some cattle for Will for the other side of the operation. But that's neither here nor there. Where I was going with this is that, when I was riding along with one of our seed reps at the end of harvest last year, we're sitting there waiting in the middle of the field, and he's like, well, this isn't good. And we were waiting because the grain cart guy wasn't back yet. And he's like, wow, we're filling him up quick. He's got to go back and forth. And it's a cool problem to have, right? Like, if you plant our seed, I'm sorry, you're going to have to spend on diesel. That's just the fact of the matter. You might even have to put in some new storage.
Yeah,
Exactly. And, it's hard to find a CDL driver nowadays, but anyway, I digress. So, with good crop, good yields come, big, healthy stalks, right? And so one of the things that I knew, a problem that the team was looking to address is like, how do we manage this residue, right? We're going out there, we're taking a beautiful crop out of there. We've got a lot of residue. And I knew Streamline was someone that's going to help us with that. Everybody knows that it's extremely difficult to prepare a seed bed whenever you've got residue in there, right? You're not going to have the right bed. How does Residue Release, specifically the name of the product, how does that help us with that?
Yeah, so I would say on that, again, back to that, providing that faster emergence, more even stand establishment, things like that. You really struggle to be able to do that. There's root balls in your way, right? I've even heard stories of the fall tillage. They did a great job of being able to actually cover that stuff up, and then they're really opportunistic thought of next year that's going to be a piece of cake, and then when they go hit it with a cultivator, all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of root ball masses on top, because in the winter cold, bacteria kind of shuts down. Pretty excited to see what this residue release product can do. Different things, questions about when can you spray it, how can you spray it, stuff like that. It's a very robust product and able to be used a lot of times. Back when I was in college, there was people out there spraying 20, 30 pounds of nitrogen over the top in the fall just to feed these microbes. But then you had to make sure the microbes were there, right? Nobody knew whether they did. Spraying residue release on these stalks, make sure that basically every leaf and every stalk has that. I mean, I'm not saying that all of a sudden next year there's going to be nothing out there, because there will still be some, but it'll be easier to break up, easier to get through. And the cool thing about it is, so we sprayed it on our ground this year, and we spray a fall burn down to help keep weeds for winter annuals gone. And we were able to mix the product in with that. Other people asked me this fall, hey, we're going to do fall tillage. Do I spray it on ahead of tillage, after tillage? And I guess, Jason, you can comment on this and make sure I say it right. But the response I've gotten is the best thing to do is spray it right before you till it, above and below the ground. and they'll start working underground as well. As pretty excited to see how this can help different growers in different situations, whether it be corn on corn or not. There's when we feed these crops, there's starting to be a lot.
Yeah, it's a good lead in, JC, because I don't have the math in front of me right at the moment, but I know, a 200 bushel corn crop produces a significant amount of tons of stover, right? And so the name of the game for any grower is to be a lowest cost provider, but also to be producing the largest amount of commodity crop that he can. So you talk about corn as an example. Typically where we see the residue release being applied is on corn stover going into soybeans, or even if it's going back into corn. There's different reasons why people will use a residue digester, but we'll focus in specifically on residue release from Streamline AG. I believe through my experience, you can use it both in the fall and in the spring. There would be different reasons why you would have those applications. As JC mentioned, if you had a perfect world, I would tell you that it's most perfect to put it on right following the combine when there's a little bit of moisture left in the stalk, as an example. And then, at some point in time, if you're a tiller, you'd come back and till that in. What we find is that you just accentuate so much more of that bacteria because you're putting on the residue release. And then as it gets chopped up, right, being chopped up smaller pieces helps because you're getting it inside where the pith is. And that's really what you're trying to break down. You're trying to break down that, as well as some of the exterior lignins that make those stalks and those rinds hard, but your nutrients are on the inside, right? So not only do we want to break down the stover, not only for mechanical reasons, less wear on tires, better planting, less down pressure, less hairpinning, all those sorts of things, but we're also trying to release the nutrients and put them back into the soil. So in a perfect world, that's how you would do it. You would put it on following the combine, and then you'd work it in if you were a tiller. But I don't want to isolate the no-till guys because really I would say 90% of the residue release that gets applied in the country right now is for guys that don't do any tillage. And they're seeing significant benefits in the ability, and let's just focus in the fall. Put it on in the fall, you can do it as with the fall burn down, as JC said. But then you get the winter months in order for the bacteria to activate and to work on the stover and breaking it down. If I had my computer pulled up with pictures, and I would pull this up and show you, but we have some pictures here in central Nebraska on some irrigated ground, high yield ground, 250 bushel ground, where the residue release was applied on October 31st. It was right during Halloween. And right now I've got some pictures that came back right after the first of the year. And there's a significant difference of where it was sprayed versus where it was untreated. And what I know will happen is over time, as we get into the springtime, you're just going to get more and more degradation. What I have to caution people on is it's not like Roundup. It's not going to be black in 2 weeks, right? And we have this idea that things are going to happen quickly. This is a biological that you're applying in the winter, and the cold weather has an effect on it. We can talk a little bit about formulation if you want, but that's the fall application. Now, spring application, and if you put it in the fall, your objectives are these. Better planting, because I'm degrading my stover. I'm following with beans or even corn. I got less hairpinning because I'm not pushing all that stover in the ground because my coulters out front are cutting through that. It's not just pushing it down. We see it all the time. Then you're obviously getting nutrient release. Okay, so there's value from the planting standpoint if in the fall. There's a lot of areas of the country where guys are like, my sprayer's put away before harvest, right? It's winterized. I'm not getting it out. The co-op's not getting it out. And so we can only put it on in the spring. There's just as much value in the spring. It just happens at a different time. I'll give you an analogy, or at least give you some comparison. You put it on in the spring with your pre-emerge and you go ahead and you plant. We know that you have beans. I'll use beans as an example. They canopy, it creates a really humid environment in there with moisture, and it really starts to degrade that stover that's there. What's interesting, what I have found, because I've worked with some guys on this project, is that put it on in the spring, and on soybeans, we typically see in a period where soybeans are trying to extract a lot of nutrients from the soil. Sometimes the soil can't provide it because the soybeans are trying to get it so fast. It's about dealing with that top upper cluster of soybeans again, and that's where your final 6, 7, 8 bushel can be. About that same time period, you could make a correlation of where that nutrient from that stover is becoming available to those beans. So you're not losing any of the nutrient side. It's just coming at maybe a later period when we apply the residue release product in spring. Okay, we don't necessarily get the value of easier planting, but we are still going to get the nutrient release, and we're still going to get it at a time where a crop like soybeans can capture it. So there's a lot of uses for this product, and I want the listeners to know that there's multiple times you can use it and still see value from it.
I think another thing to add to that one is is there a time when it's too late to spray in the fall? And I'll have some pretty good trials of this year on my own, because I asked Jason that question once or twice, because we got out there spraying a bunch of the burn down, and then a cold snap and some other things got going on, so we didn't have an operator to spray it. And all of a sudden it's like, well, do we winterize the sprayer and give up on the year, or do we wait? We found another, due to this great November, December, we had to spray more ground, didn't have to worry about tips freezing or anything. And I think the reality is we might not get the activity that in October or even a September application would be able to benefit us from, most likely because the microbes won't activate, right? And then at the point, though, they're all there out ready to rock and roll for when it does get warm. And honestly, here next week, we're supposed to turn into the 40s. I mean, as far as our cattle operation goes, I just soon stay in the 20s so they don't have to deal with that temperature swing. But I guess I'll take it. This 8-degree stuff's getting kind of old. We just got back to the war place. Another cool thing about the residue release that I mean, the ability to apply it with another product. You know, I had a grower ask me, can you put it on with the nitrogen? And I guess the response I got was, it'll actually just work better. You know,
right. Yeah.
Can I put it with this herbicide, that herbicide? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the ability for mixing these in is extremely wide open. The microbes are really tough to survive. And then on top of that, there is the RTU version that actually comes stacked with some water agents, conditioners, surfactants. So that way, all you got to do is add your chemistry.
Yeah, you're right, JC. And for the benefit of our listeners, there's a lot of residue digesters on the marketplace. There's a couple things I would tell you that make them different. One is, do you have to apply a nitrogen source? You do not have to apply a nitrogen source with residue release. The way it's been formulated is a process called sporulation. For those of you that are people that like to understand what that is, look it up. It'll make sense. But when a process goes through sporulation, it basically gives it the ability to handle and survive adverse conditions easier. So that's one differentiation in this product versus other residue digesters. The other part is the surfactant. We have a very, very high-grade surfactant. The reason why that is very important is because if you're a no-tiller, as an example, so if you're listening to this, the key of any residue digester is to get as much of it inside the stover and the soft parts of the tissue of where the old tissue was. That's the goal. And so if you can't get it inside, you just are not going to have the efficacy of the breakdown. And so not all surfactants are created equal. And I would tell you that from my experience, having a high-grade surfactant is very beneficial, not only to the degradation, but going to what JC said, is that surfactant is really important and very helpful when you're putting it with herbicide interaction and using it, whether it's for burn down or pre-emerge or what have you. We already have a really high-grade surfactant in there, and it doesn't counter affect any of the other chemistries. I don't at this point have ever had anybody call and say, hey, we mixed these products together and I didn't mix. I just haven't run into it.
You know, something that's popped in my mind twice here. I go back to hearing some stories, and I never had I was never doing it myself. You know, there used to be a lot of soil applied residual herbicide products that were applied. Obviously, we have all kinds of technology out there now at the same point in time. 100-foot boom sprayer, 120 feet. But if you're going to go out there with a vertical till or a high-speed disc or something like that anyway, do you think you get the same benefit of literally spraying it on immediately ahead of the cultivator or disc or vertical till right before it got diced up?
Yes.
It's just a way to maybe, if you already got that piece of equipment somewhere, and it doesn't take much to add that, but I think the question there would make sure to get good application rates. That might be one of those ideas that might just need to stay in the box, but some people might be good at doing that.
Well, I think, I think you pose a really good question. And, people ask, what's the limitations on a product like this? And I don't know that any of us know the full limitations on the product like this until people, want to go outside the box and try it. But the reality is people ask me all the time, well, how soon can I let my cattle go out if I spray residue release? I'm like, immediately. In fact, you can spray the residue release if you want and just push the cows over on the other side of the field with your sprayer as you're going. There's no limitation. And I think the reality is when you're thinking about what you just described from a mechanical standpoint, once it's on, it's on, right? It sticks. It's going to stick to something. It's going to stick to, and even if it sticks to soil, as an example, these products, they're going to move around, right? I mean, we have these how does it get from the soil already now onto the stover, right? I mean, it's the contact. So JC, I think you're onto something when the idea of I think product application, and I wouldn't say it's limitless, but I think we haven't maybe necessarily dove into every possible combination. And if you got guys that are cover crop users, if you have people that are listening that are cover crop, this is a great product to terminate cover crop. A lot of the reason is because of the surfactant, but once that cover crop's terminated, now you have something on it that begins to break down that stover from that cover crop, releasing those nutrients that you have tied up in that stover back into the soil faster.
As you say, just spray out there and chase your cow around the field. Gives me a little PTS because, doing this warm spell here we got late in the year and having the opportunity to still get some of our fall burn out spray that we worried we weren't going to, that resulted in me spraying a load or two into the evening. Obviously we're not looking for the complete kill right there. A lot of it's the residual that's going to help us throughout the winter and into the spring. Black cattle with 106 foot boom in the dark and literally no lights on the right side of your boom except the little blinky lights on aim command. It gives you a little nervousness about whether or not you see that cow.
Yeah, that's a unique way to herd cattle. Maybe you're onto something there.
Well, that just takes me back to another story when I was a little lazy and I thought I'll get in there and get out and won't have to shut the gate. And the next thing I know, I could call my brother to come over and help get them in. But I did have a 106 foot movable ham help me bring it back.
One thing about cattle that you all know is that the minute they hear a gate opening, they don't forget it and they're there immediately.
Yes. The nice thing is they also know where they came from, and as long as it hasn't been too long, they're usually good enough, except one or two stubborn ones, that they will head back, and they know they're not supposed to be.
Yeah, and since we're joking about cows, people ask me, is it safe for cattle, right? A residue digester. This one in particular is. We don't have any issues, like I mentioned. In fact, we have pictures where people have used the residue digester on, maybe they had a quarter or a piece of ground and they split it and they put cows on it. We get these every year where the cows stay on the side that was treated. And people ask, well, why is it? Does it taste better? I'm like, I don't know. Ask the cow. But the reality is that I believe that I don't think it's altering necessarily any of the sugar or anything that's in it. I think it's just, and maybe it is, right? I'm not a veterinarian. Not a nutritionist, but I think the palatability, because you're breaking down the lignin of those stalks, it's just easy for those cows to eat. And once they figure it out, they're like, well, we're just going to stay here. Why would we go to the other side? So, anecdotal.
You talk about breaking down residual or residue and whatnot with that, but if you all of a sudden have the ability, you're going to get a lot.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
There's the jacked up version of residue release.
Residue release. No, and that's if you're a cattle operations here, right? And if you're not, I mean, I think that's what's really cool about this product, just as we're going through it, is that you don't need to mix it in with nitrogen, and you can, and really at the end of the day, folks are able to take yesterday's leftovers, right, and turn them into tomorrow's fuel, per se.
Yep.
And you're not limited as to when it goes in the ground. Yes, it'll be nicer if you're gonna go do some tillage, spray it beforehand so that we can get that into there and work into there a little bit easier. But that's so many options. Like I said, we've been at this for almost an hour and a half now, and I know we can go on forever. And JC, I appreciate the firsthand experience, because I think that's another thing that I pride myself on when I talk to my brother-in-law again, Mark. You're hearing this is that our team does this here, right? I mean, you're hearing James go out there and talk about chasing cattle with or trying, corral things in the middle of the night and work things in. And I can't tell you how many times I've helped clean out a planter when these guys are still going to keep going late into the evening, right? So our team is working the fields. Our team is getting firsthand experience at this and our needs so that you don't have to. So if we're coming to you with this now, it's because we truly believe in it. The Cornelius family believes in it. Their name's on the bag. They wouldn't just put everything out there this way unless it wasn't, not even just a good product, but a high-end, top-of-the-line product. Last one, folks, there, unless there was something else you guys think we needed to touch base on. But one of the things with starter fertilizers is that they can be corrosive. And, does Streamline have something out there that can help us with that, right? I mean, we're kind of talking about the whole life cycle of the plant here. What about on that side of the front with fertilizers?
JC, I don't know if you want to make the introduction to it.
So we have the ability to convert here. It's actually one of my tabletop settings here right now. But yes, I mean, we used to use starter fertilizer ourselves, used to buy the cheap stuff, and basically we just make sure and wash the heck out of our planters every year. Anytime we cleaned it off right away. Then we, dropped, then all of a sudden when you start dropping $100,000 on a planter, you're thinking, okay, now the extra couple dollars for the higher end starter fertilizer. A, you get lower volume. B, all of a sudden it's not going, still sticky as can be, but it's not going to corrode it. Now, when we talk about convert fertilizer here, be able to replace starter, easily being able to replace a 1034 application. We have the Kickstart version that adds potassium and sulfur to it, which gives another bang for the buck. But just something with a low salt index, I believe it's 4. And I don't know. In the seed corn application, we do some defoliants on the seed corn, certain inbreds and whatnot. With that is D-Fol 5, and it is pretty much just, I think, sodium chlorate. So if this has a salt index of 4, would you have any idea what a salt index of sodium chlorate is? I mean, would it be like 100?
It's way more than 4.
So, I mean, easy to mix, easy to go, stays in suspension pretty darn well, and really just disappears. But I did this on our entire post-harvest tour, just gently rolling it here. What is the rate there? You mix 1 pound per 2 gallons of water, and the recommendation is 2.5 pounds per acre, resulting in a 5-gallon application rate. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So a lot of starters out there are shooting in that 4, 5, 6 gallons per acre. So you're really not mixing anything up, and you put this in an agitation tank or an inductor. When you mix it out, it can easily disappear.
Yeah, JC, as he's mixing that up, what we have found is people ask a lot of questions. Well, do I have to have warm water? Is there certain pHs of water where it doesn't work? No, right? I mean, we have high pH, we got low pH, we got all different kinds of water, high alkaline water, you name it, salty water. We haven't run into any conditions at this point. Doesn't mean they're not out there. We haven't run into many yet where we don't get good mixing. It does go into a full solution. You'll see after you do it at the bottom, there'll be a little bit of silica in it, and that silica is just part of, it'll eventually disappear. But I think the most important thing, and JC mentioned it, is, as you, from a seed company's perspective, the worst thing you can do for your seed is to put something on it that's harmful. I'm going to pick on 1034O. I used to sell a lot of it in my co-op days, and I remember that it is green and it is sticky. And if you get a bad batch of phosphoric acid, you could end up with black 1034O. And any of you that ever used black 1034O, it's awful. All those things are just negative on the seed coat. It's just negative. And anytime that you can remove the negativity on that seed coat so that way you can have better emergence, that's really what we're trying to work for. I don't want to pretend to believe that this is the best starter fertilizer ever because of high nutrient value and all these sorts of things. The reality is it's a low, as JC said, it's a low salt index. It's a 4. JC could stick his finger in that solution right now, and it is not sticky. He can leave that on his desk now for the next 6 months to a year and it'll still look the same. And so from a standpoint of, I see multiple uses of this particularly, but the one thing I really want to highlight, if we're going to just compare apples to apples, let's just compare 1034 to the Convert Kickstart product. Inside of this product is a what we call ether technology, and inside of there are two enzymes. And I don't know if our listeners understand really what enzymes are, but they're not alive. Enzymes are not alive. And what they really do is they create chemical interactions within the soil. And for their main purpose is to do certain things. There's two enzymes inside of the Convert. One is called phosphatase, and the other is called manganase. Why are they important and why are they in there? Well, phosphatase, its primary function is to take tied up organic phosphate and move it into soluble bioavailable phosphorus. So that phosphate basically. So basically what we're saying is that chemical reaction from that enzyme in the soil gives the ability to, if we have phosphorus in our soil, which we do, we can start releasing some of that phosphorus from the soil because it's tied up. That's, if you understand how cations work, that's how phosphorus gets tied up. The enzymes create a chemical reaction to be able to knock some of that phosphorus off the soil colloid, which then makes it available to the plant. That's phosphatase. Manganase has a little bit different function. Manganase, its primary function is to break down starches in the exudate on the roots that surrounds the outermost layer of the root tips. So, and the reason you would break that starch down is when you break that starch down at the end of that exudate at the end of the roots, basically it's kind of like, maybe you consider it maybe like a callus, those exudates, but then when you can break that apart, you allow better interaction of water and minerals. And so that's the purpose for the manganase and why it's important. So I'm not going to get real heady, but if all things are considered equal, let's say we have the equal amount of nutrients inside of Toro and Convert. The difference is the Convert has the enzymes, and I believe the enzymes are highly critical, especially in areas that have high phosphorus in the soil that's tied up that we can't get to.
Yeah, and
I think the enzyme.
No, please, yours is going to be way more.
All right. Well, I think the enzymes. That's obviously, we've been talking about it in the ether in the pail. You have the ether in this. Jason, what's your thoughts on, if you're using Convert and have that in here, you put that in the furrow, should you also add add it with the pail as well, with the ether in the pail? Is it doubling up on an awesome thing that's going to get you more? Is it actually double dipping? Need to have the expense on the grower?
Well, that's a great question. In fact, I had a discussion with somebody today about that before we were on this podcast. I would tell you, here's if I was writing checks with my checkbook, right? That's how I'll present it to you. If you already have a starter system on your planter, you're probably not going to be using the TuneUp Plus pail. Now, I could be wrong, but if it were me, I would probably stick with the pail, even if I had a starter system. That's just my bias based on what I've seen. And I would also equate that back to dealing with maybe more of a break-even type commodity price. However, if we were getting to a place where commodity prices were a little bit better, or for whatever reason we felt like we wanted to have that additional enzyme, because the enzyme phosphatase is not in the ether technology in the pail. Okay, that they have, the pail with ether technology has the manganase, which is the same as what's in the Convert product, but it also has lipase, which has a little bit different interaction. Not to be confusing to the listeners, but if I was going to choose between one or the other, it would be the pail. If I wasn't using the pail, then I certainly would be using the Convert. If I was going to dabble with both, then I would say maybe you don't use the full 2.5 pounds per 5 gallon. And you try to capture some of that phosphatase, because at this point, it becomes more of a cost issue. I would love to see somebody, if you have a grower that wants to try it, is do the Convert. I've got some data that would show that the Convert plus the TuneUp Plus both pays for themselves by adding them. And I don't mean to be long-winded, but I don't know that we have enough data points to say that both of them together gives us enough consistent win time and time again. I think it's an easier pill to swallow if you're dealing with $7 corn, because then you can test that, right?
There's a lot of positives about $7 corn other than that price is nitrogen prices usually skyrocket, right? So yeah, that's an interesting response, and I appreciate it. I think we always want to looking at from, if I was writing the checks, always an important thing, because that's what every customer needs to be doing themselves. So yeah, I guess I would probably agree with you on the point of, if you're gonna pick between the two, I like the pail because it's got some of the enzymes in it, but at the same point, you got all the other stuff. I'm really looking at bringing it back into our system and whatnot. We had decided, when the prices of starter kept going through the roof, and we were getting great stand establishment on our seed corn acres, even, that we thought Pivot Bio was actually more of a benefit to get that additional nitrogen source. So we have pulled that off, and I'm looking at trying to put this back in with it. Another thing, I guess, that I've always been thinking about is, how many storage tanks do you have to have, and when you start putting starters in it and stuff like that, how much stuff's growing, how much stuff's settling out in it. At the end of every planting season, we would go in and make sure to clean that tender out that had it. We'd also have to call on a regular basis to have more of it delivered. All of a sudden it's Sunday afternoon and you didn't realize that you're going to get that much planted a day and have 3-4 planters roll through, and now you're out of started fertilizer. Usually you can get it, but sometimes it's hard to get that next delivery to show up when you need it. And I'm pretty excited about the fact, you can have a bulk bag of this sitting there, or 50-pound bag sitting there. And all you got to do is use your same system that you're using for your sprayer, your same system that you're using for other situations, and it's just watering.
Yeah, and for reference, right? So let's say you have we talk about storage space for a real brief second, right? I mean, a pallet of at a half a pound per gallon, or JCU said a pound per 2 gallons for a 5-gallon application rate. A pallet of convert will do 800 acres at that rate, right? You think about, if I've got 800 acres that I'm putting starter fertilizer on, I got to have a lot of starter fertilizer. And that's going to go into a tube. If I'm putting 5 gallons on 800 acres, I need 4,000 gallons, right? So there's a storage issue there, and JC, you said it. And those of us that understand how particulates fall out over the winter months, the bigger the tank, the less fallout. The smaller the tank, the narrower the tank, the more colder the tank gets, the more fallout. And so if you're worried about those things and you just don't want to deal with containment, and you're tired of dealing with stickiness, and you're tired of dealing with planters, a $175,000 planter, I'm making numbers up, but I mean, I know they're expensive, and you don't want them to get rusty because of using a high salt content starter fertilizer. If you want to protect that and keep your resale value, and I would tell you that Convert's the way to go. You were joking about your cows. When I worked at the co-op, I was pretty much a grunt right out of college, helping in the agronomy department. That's what I did. And I remember the second year of my employment, we decided it would be a great idea to take the cover off the manhole on the 1,000,000-gallon 1034O tank that we had and clean it out. I can tell you from experience that that's a job I never, ever want to do again in my entire life, because it was the sediment at the bottom of that 1,000,000-gallon tank was almost to the top of my rubber boots. And it took 2.5 weeks of being in there 8 hours a day, of figuring out unique ways to break it up with high pressure water, using water that had a little bit of 32% to break that apart. And then we had to find a place to go put it in terms of how you got rid of it appropriately. And I thought to myself the whole time, man, we sold a lot of really expensive 1034O that might not have really had a lot of nutrients in it.
Yes, I have that same situation of experienced seed treatments in the past. Station is hard because it's very easy to keep them in solution. And all of a sudden you sit there and go over a weekend or something like that, and all of a sudden there's just a layer of stuff on the bottom. And we found a way to do it, but the only way we'd add a whole bunch more water, which made it harder to get the job done. But I always thought, to your point, okay, so is that just the polymer settling out, or did we just take out all the AIs, right? I mean, so when you look at something like that, I mean, it's you mix a new batch to make sure you have enough load rate and all that stuff. That's why we get away from anything like that. A lot of the generic seed treatments out there do that and whatnot. I mean, we're told that the seed treatments we use barely even need any agitation, but the strict protocol that when we start mixing a batch, we recirculate it in that jug. for quite a while before, depending on the size, it's longer, but to make sure that if there is any kind of potential for settlement, it's mixed up again, and just something that we do that may not be necessary, but as you go back to striving for perfection to make sure that the grower gets what they pay for.
Yeah, and I know we're about ready to close out. I guess I would just say, along those lines, you talk about where we're at today in the industry. The industry is really looking towards being, in some regard, okay, so I'm not trying to isolate any particular products, but we're really trying to divert back to ease of use, as we mentioned, but then also efficacy, and a lot of that comes in dry formulations, right? Now, you talk to the old timers, whoever those are, but when I remember being in the co-op system early in my year, we had a lot of dry flowables, we had a lot of dry wettables, and some of them are a real pain. We only really went to liquids, in my opinion, because it became an easier way to handle, because we didn't know how to handle dries very well. Now we're getting to a place where we're being able to deal with the components like the pails, like the converts, and it's not just our company, it's other companies. They're figuring out how we can use dries and we can take large volumes. We once had to use large volumes, and we're compressing it into small, easy deliverable packages where the farmer can get the same efficacy. And so I think that's really where the industry is going in a lot of ways. And so guys that adopt to this technology are going to find, I think, really some cost savings, labor savings along the way, just because they're not having to deal with such volume and trucking and all those sorts of things. Of course, some of that's my bias, but it's also working with some growers closely that have told me, this just makes my life easier. I don't have to I'm getting the same value, but it's less. It's less cost, it's less time, it's less management. I think people have to think about that in the overall scheme. And James, you alluded to it very, very early in this conversation, was, not always are we going to see a yield bump per se. Consistently, we hope to, right? We hope to, but we also, I think, have to look at it from a big scheme and a big picture and saying, can I eliminate some pieces that are saving money? And even if I use this product, I'm saving there, even though I might not be gaining on yield all the time, but I'm still winning, right? And I think that's the end game.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you highlighting it that way, because it's very easy to fall into it should be natural, fall into the, yield, right? And it obviously that's how we pay the bills, but it's also a matter of, you said it perfectly, consistency. And, what are some of those other problems that we're not thinking of that are out there, whether it's storage, right? You're trying to supply water, you've got limited tanks, and how are you doing this? And it's just a really creative way of delivering what you need, right? So some of this, a lot of this stuff is not necessarily new, but it's a new way of doing it. And I think that's what's fantastic about it, is we're constantly improving, and we're excited about this partnership.
We are too.
Interestingly enough, you talked about it not being sticky here. I tipped this over. I need to go wash this table. There is no stick.
What's it? Well, hey, it's safe though. What's it taste like? Can you let us know? We've got a live feed going right now.
I would say that this might be a potential problem, Jason.
Yeah,
I am not going to be the guy that back when Roundup came out, all of a sudden they drink it to tell you it's safe. I feel like I have the duty to my children to make sure that I don't do silly stuff like that. I do enough other silly stuff in my life.
Yes.
Fair. That's fair.
Yeah, don't drink it. You might put a label on it.
Don't drink it. Yeah. To be clear on that, and a real quick thing on that, and I know we are out of time, but you mentioned the label, and I'm happy that you did that, because as we were going through this discovery phase, and even just me touching base with you and other members of the team here last week, something that was unique that I just hadn't thought about before is just like, hey, if we're talking about a Streamline product that we're offering that's coming in the pail or in a different form, you can go and find exactly what is in this thing, right? We're not just telling you here's a promise of what it could do or might do or potentially do, or some huge proprietary secret. Our customers and growers, prospective folks, can go on there, go on the website and find out exactly what's in this. Personally, for me, someone that's data driven, an immediate red flag that I have if I'm working on something is if it's obscure for me to find the information, right? So if I'm buying something and I don't know exactly what's in it, that it's safe for JC to drink in front of us, like he said he's going to, we're seriously able to find out, and I can go through and pick the top 10 names of additives, for lack of a better word, that are out in the industry right now that are new or that have been around. And I challenge folks, go out there, find out what's in it and what's that doing. And I think you're just going to get for yourself, by yourself, a grain of transparency that's huge, and it's important, and it should be important to you because it's important to us.
Yeah, to that point, I actually remember a time I was looking at a potential seed treatment, and I looked up the label, found it, actually even pulled it off their website, right? And the words were algae extracts, something else. And then literally the finish of the paragraph was, in a whole bunch of other goodies. And I'm thinking, well, that was quite a few years ago, and obviously trillions of dollars have been put towards this segment of the industry. Resulting, I think there's still plenty of foo-foo dust or pixie dust out there, if you will. But to that point, I think the Streamline package is one that is not. It is, yes, there's stuff in biologicals that we still don't know exactly what's. God might be the only one to ever know completely what's
For sure.
so active and diverse. But the reality is, it's as much science-driven as we can get. And that's where we need to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's as much science driven as we can get to a point where we tapped out on what we know, right? And we're going to continue. It's no different than, we could talk about this for hours, but we're going to know more in a year from now than we knew today. And in 5 years from now, we're not going to know just 5 times more. We're going to know 100 times more, right? Just because of what we continue to unlock. And that's, I think, the beauty of the business, but it's the skepticism of the business right now too. And I hope listeners understand that it's okay to be skeptical. I get it. I grew up with a father who was skeptical of a lot of things on the farm because he just had a lot of bad experiences. And I think there are farmers that certainly have had a lot of bad experiences. They've been sold a lot of empty promises. And that's unfortunate, right? And so it's our job as reputable organizations, and there's many, it's not just Streamline Ag, to be able to help people understand that if you're going to use it, here's why. What's the problem it solves, right? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Does the product portfolio fit on every of your acres? Maybe not, right? Maybe you're already doing a really good job. But as Juan mentioned earlier in the podcast, of maybe you have a ceiling that you're trying to bump through. Well, how can we do that, right? Is that the problem? How do we address it? And if you're working with somebody that thinks like that, then you're going to find the right companies. If you're working with somebody that's just trying to sell you a product that's, cheap per acre and they don't have a label, then I would tell you to steer clear, because basically the three of us, all of our names start with J. We could call it Triple J Biologicals, and we could put all kinds of stuff in a bathtub and we could mix it up, put it in a jug, and we'd sell it as Juan's juice, right?
I love it. Triple J Extreme.
We're talking about jungle juice here. Juan's jungle juice, right?
Maybe patent that in college. I need to look.
Right. No. So, but in all reality, I mean, I think that's where people get leery, right? And I get it. I 100% get it. But I think if you can go back to the principles, and the principles are, show me a label, number one, and then tell me the products that are in it, tell me what they do, right? So tell me why the bacillus species that we have in the pail, what do they do and how do they help me, right? And if you can get that kind of information, then I think it helps create or decrease skepticism in the marketplace. Those are my final, really happy remarks.
Jason, I really appreciate that, and I love that way, and I kind of want to see if our team can go out there and just push that, is just show me the label, right? Because we talked about a lot today. We've explored. There's a lot of powerful tools coming out of Streamline Ag, and we just touched base on 3 or 4 of them. I mean, there's a whole umbrella of more that's out there, because not every operation is the same, whether it's within the mean issues that are present in them. And so that's what I think, what I know we really like about this. We're helping face the challenges in the fields. TuneUp Plus, it's going to give corn and soybeans the boost they need, whether it's going to be for faster emergence, healthier roots, or better just nutrient uptake, right? Get that strong start that they need. We talked about residue release. We're going to turn those leftovers into nutrient-rich fertilizer, and then convert. I would say it's a game-changing starter fertilizer that's a replacement, And it's a replacement in the sense because it's safer and it's easier to store. Heck, it's even going to give you mileage on your steel, so we're not worried about corrosion. And it's bringing in that crucial, whether it's potassium or sulfur that you need and when you need it. So we talked about a bunch there, and I can't stress enough. I'd really appreciate your time. Really appreciate this partnership and any final notes that either of you have.
No, I'd like to double down on thanks, Jason, for his time today. Thanks, Juan, for hosting, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. Otherwise, pretty excited about what we'll be able to unlock for yield potential and adding this to the Cornelius Seed lineup. As somebody once said, the ability to make your great hybrids and varieties.
Yeah, I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. This has been a great partnership thus far. And if you guys ever want to do a podcast on crazy things that have happened in the ag industry from a personal experience, I'm sure JC and I could probably fill up a whole hour. So mark me down for that one.
And
not even necessarily things that I've experienced, but stories I have heard.
Well,
you might have to sign an NDA to listen to that.
Yeah, perhaps.
We'll fax that right over. But folks, you heard it here first, right? So, at Cornelius Seed, we're always looking to partner with innovative companies like Streamline AG, and because we're going to bring you products that are going to solve problems and they're going to save you time and money in your pocket. Whether you're dealing with a nutrient deficiency, the end pressure, or tough residue in those fields, there's solutions that are out there and that are here to help your crops thrive and your operation succeed. So when you're ready to take the next step, you can reach out to us at any of our socials. Just look up Cornelius Seed or @Planet Profit. Just give us a jingle and we'd be happy to take care of you. Till the next one, have a good one.